Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by the Cavendish Group of Companies. Let's shake on it.
Midsummer sets us free. You don't burn me once again.
Actually, the baby didn't slip out of her hands. It was trying to escape.
I spit upon your fire. Wow. Princeton of all mortal wisdom. Owl of Bohemia, we beseech thee, grant us thy counsel. Once again, Midsummer sets us free.
Hello and welcome back to the Synaxis Podcast. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Josh.
And this is our Spookytober, a scary Halloween witches brew cauldron special extravaganza. We're just going to jam a lot of different stuff together that kind of fits and maybe doesn't, and hopefully it goes over well. But we watched some movies.
Yeah.
We read some books. We're going to talk about Halloween-related things. 2 movies we watched, Ready or Not and Late Night with the Devil, which I think came out 2023 or 24, pretty recent. Both really cool and both similar themes about elite Satanism and devilry.
Yeah.
And there's just a whole lot in them that we're just going to have a conversation about. It's going to be pretty scattershot, but I think interesting things will come out about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Because a lot of stuff ties in with what we normally talk about. We're going to get into things like Bohemian Grove, Salem Witch Trials. It's going to go all over the place, and hopefully it has some kind of structure.
Yeah, there's a coherence to the themes. There's a relatedness between
I think
all
it
the
ties
separate
together.
things.
So, I guess we'll just get straight into it. We're going to spoil both of these movies.
So yeah, if you haven't seen them and you're really interested, you might want to take a second and find them online. They're pretty good.
Yeah, if you're like a movie watcher and you like spooky stuff, I would definitely recommend both of these.
Yeah.
I think they're both well made. I guess we'll start with Ready or Not. Came out in 2019, directed by Matt Bettinelli Olpin and Tyler Gillette. They are part of a film collective called Radio Silence. The synopsis is: a bride's wedding night takes a sinister turn when her eccentric new in-laws force her to take part in a terrifying game. So yeah, the premise of this is that Samara Weaving, the main character, her name's Grace. Her character name's Grace, and she is marrying into this rich gaming family.
Yeah, they created a bunch of board games and stuff back a long time ago. So they're almost like a dynasty. I think in the movie she even says, she's like, "Do I call you a dynasty?" And they're like, "We prefer Dominion."
That's right. Yeah,
but
the Les Domas family.
Yeah,
and so several generations. Great grandfather. He made playing cards, and then he met someone named
Mr. LaBelle.
Mr. LaBelle, some financier, a mysterious financier that helped him build this board game empire. Now they own sports teams, and they're just a very
they're kind of just like any big family that's been around a long time. Like people associate the Rockefellers or the Vanderbilts or someone a family that has generational wealth. Like someone a long time ago did something, and then the family just carries the money on, and they make a lot of money, and they have a bunch of estates, and everyone recognizes them as a well-known family.
Mm-hmm. And you very quickly realize that there's something dark going on with them, and it's pretty occult. So they have this initiation sort of ritual. When people marry into their family, they have to play a game, and they have this mysterious box that's supposedly from Mr. LaBelle, he's this dark presence, and you find out in the end that he's some kind of, I don't know, he must be some kind of demon.
Yeah, I mean the first image in the movie when it starts, it shows a board game that says Mr. LaBelle's Gambit, and it's a picture, a cartoonish picture of the devil. So it's a red face kind of with horns, so it really But, you know, Mr. LaBelle's gambit. Before you even find out that the family met someone named Mr. LaBelle, like the first image you see is Mr. LaBelle's gambit, and it looks like the devil.
Yeah, so they have to play a game. They put a blank card in this weird box, and then it comes out, and then she has to pull it out, and it will give them the game to play for this initiation ritual. And every once in a while, it's hide and seek, and that one involves killing her. They have to kill her before sunrise and sacrifice her so that the family can keep going on and keep enjoying their worldly, their material wealth.
Yeah, and it seems to be they kind of allude to it being an uncommon thing that happens where hide and seek's actually bold. Like a couple of people who married to the family are like, I got old maid.
This has only happened once since I've been in the family. Yeah, I think the mom says that.
And the two kids who it happened when they were kids, like they're in their 30s by the time it happened. So, 30 years before it happened. But up until that point, a bunch of people had married into the family and they all got kind of innocuous games where no murder is involved. And it's just like, oh, play the silly game. Cool. Now, LaBelle picked this game. You play old maid. Now you're part of the family. Mm-hmm. But it starts the main character, the Grace or whatever, after their wedding.
Yeah, and she's marrying Alex, who's like, he's sort of a black sheep. He's been distant from the family, and you find out that he doesn't really want to be a part of this. There's a really nice scene towards the end of the movie where he's talking to his mother about how, like, I never realized how weird it was that we were sacrificing goats and doing all this stuff, and until I met Grace, and she made me want to be a better person and want to get out of this kind of life. And so he's like conflicted the whole time, but we don't need to get super into the plot, but the main point is that, like, there's an interesting sort of exploration of the idea of a rich family that owes what they have to dark forces that they've made a deal with. And the way the film kind of plays out is you're not really sure if any of that is real or if it's like a weird superstition that they have, if they're just like weird rich people that have these ingrained beliefs that maybe aren't true.
Yeah, I think some people in their family don't think it is real. They're like, nothing's going to happen if we don't do this. And they're like, well, what happened to this family? It's like, what happened to this part of our family?
Yeah.
Oh, well, they just died in a fire. And then the dad's like, no, it was worse than that. You just don't know about it. Mm-hmm. So it's like, there's kind of varying beliefs in the family. Like one of the brothers thinks it's ridiculous. He's like, nothing's going to happen. This is kind of just a ridiculous thing we do. It's some stupid tradition, but...
Mm-hmm. And then you find out at the end, spoilers, it is real, and they fail to go through with the sacrifice, and they all meet a very grisly end. Mm-hmm. And you even see the apparition of Mr. LaBelle in his chair, really briefly. And something interesting about that, I think, is one of the producers on this is James Vanderbilt from the Vanderbilt family, and it makes me wonder how much input he had.
Because he's the one that does the cameo as Mr. LaBelle, right?
Yeah, he actually plays Mr. LaBelle, like that quick.
They show just a
shot.
Quick clip. He doesn't even fully like appear. He's almost like a shadowy.
Yeah, for a second he like nods at her after it all happens, and it's like, and I don't know. I mean, he is a film producer. I think he also did Zodiac. He has like an interesting filmography. I can only speculate about like the kind of messaging and how much input he had on it, but the Vanderbilts, I've seen images going around with Gloria Vanderbilt and Anderson Cooper, and they have like these weird occult shrines in their bedrooms and stuff. If you look into the history of the Vanderbilts, I sort of briefly read up on some of it, but it definitely seems like it could be a sort of real life parallel to like the Ladomas family in this film. And it just kind of makes you wonder how much of this stuff actually is real. And there's a sort of plausible deniability. It's like, it's just a silly movie. But I'm not too sure that it's all fake.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of rich families throughout history that have kind of been openly into the occult.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it probably in a more nefarious matter, and some of it might have just been like interesting in the different cultural kind of stuff. Because a lot of times in the past, when things were translated from other cultures, a lot of documents would come in, and with that would come in a lot of weird occult stuff, and the first people to get it translated would usually be like really rich families. So they would contract out someone to like translate a bunch of stuff, and with the translations of Plato and stuff, like Ficino, first guy to translate a lot of I think he was like a Catholic priest. He translated almost all of Plato, but he also translated a bunch of like Hermetic stuff. So it like came in a lot of like, oh, cool, philosophy about numbers and stuff comes in with a lot of like foreign kinds of occultism that then the rich families at the time are like, yo, what's this?
Yeah, and all these billionaires are definitely into like astrology and numerology and all that stuff, and they're mostly pretty open about it. Mm-hmm. Not all of them are true believers, but you definitely see that.
It's probably like in the movie how like the family has like varying beliefs in how real it is.
Yeah.
Like some of them are like, oh, this is a real thing and we do this. And some of them are like, it doesn't really matter. It's just an arbitrary tradition.
Yeah. And then you also get like at the end when they're finally trying to initiate the ritual and they have their cloaks and their daggers out.
And they're speaking Latin and saying Hail Satan.
Yeah.
They're like very explicitly...
You're wondering the whole time like how hardcore it is, and then you see that, and then he also made that mention of like sacrificing goats and stuff, and they have like that goat shack where they keep all the dead bodies.
Yeah, totally.
Like it's like, but and the theme of elite Satanism.
Yeah, and involving children in it. That was another thing that those families have always been accused of, is like raising their children up in a way where they're kind of used to weird occult stuff by the time they're older, so it's not this strange thing. If you hit a 20-year-old with some goat sacrifice thing, they might be like, what's going on? But if they grow up in some weird atmosphere and it's normal for their family, then it's probably a lot easier to like, makes it more palatable when they're older.
Yeah, and they did some cool character work with the different brothers struggling with having to do this.
But yeah, throughout the whole thing, they do a really good job at being like, is this real? Is it just something they're doing? And at the reveal at the end too, because they're supposed to sacrifice the person by sunup, and the sun comes up and the light comes into the room and they like hadn't done it in time and they're all like bracing for it and they're like and then they open their eyes and they all kind of have this thing where they're like, oh, is this not real? And then they all start to meet a gruesome fate.
The girl still dies and then she explodes.
Totally. And then it was like, oh, and then they all kind of explode and you're like, oh, well, that is real. And that's when Mr. LaBelle like pops up and like nods or like winks at the girl and then disappears.
And apparently the original ending was going to be that that Grace gets sacrificed, but the filmmakers thought that was kind of a downer, so they wanted to end it that she emerges victorious, and they end it with that joke where it's like, what happened here? And she's like, in-laws.
Yeah, totally.
But just all of that stuff. I wish I had more deep things to say about it, because I didn't get to do all that much research, but it definitely it just kind of evokes a lot of different questions, and it ties into the next movie we're going to talk about too, which is called Late Night with the Devil. Again, we're going to spoil everything that happens. I really like this movie too.
Yeah, it was well done, and it was filmed in a cool style. I like the way that it was filmed.
So here's the IMDb synopsis. October 31st, 1977, Johnny Carson rival Jack Delroy hosts a syndicated talk show, Night Owls, that has long been a trusted companion to insomniacs around the country. A year after the tragic death of Jack's wife, ratings have plummeted. Desperate to turn his fortunes around, Jack plans a Halloween special like no other, unaware he's about to unleash evil into the living rooms of America. So yeah, the whole premise is that this is a never-before-seen, or a newly unreleased episode of this fake 70s late-night show that aired on Halloween, that had a very tragic ending, and it's the Halloween episode, so all the guests are occult themed. There's a psychic, there's a skeptic, and then there's a girl who's supposedly possessed by a demon, and her psychologist. And it's structured exactly like a Conan O'Brien or a Johnny Carson show. They have like the sidekick, Gus. He's a lot like Andy Richter or one of those guys. And they just weave in all of this occult stuff, all these references. I mean, the skeptic guy is
James Randi.
He's a send-up of James Randi, who is this.
He was like he became like a professional debunker.
He was a magician first, and then he started debunking all the occult stuff and all the paranormal things.
Yeah, he was like an early version of like what became like Skeptic magazine, and someone like that who's like, this is all charlatanry, and let me show you how using tricks that this is all performed. But yeah, since he was a magician, like he knew a lot about sleight of hand, so he could kind of see other people's shenanigans and tricks and be like, this isn't real. But he also has just like kind of an arrogant attitude. I don't know if you've ever seen James Randi. I think he put up originally like $1 million challenge that if someone could show some kind of like supernatural thing, he'd give him $1 million.
Yeah, which they reference in the movie too. There was an Australian talk show with an American host, Don Lane, and apparently like this interview with James Randi on the Don Lane show was a big inspiration for the movie. I'll probably put a clip of it in here.
You give us a lot of lip service about all this stuff that you're going to prove. You go against a lady like Doris Stokes who never harmed anybody in her whole life, and you call her a charlatan and a fake.
You know a great deal about it.
Yes, I do. You said that she was a liar on the radio. You called her a liar.
No.
And that woman wouldn't lie to
I have
anybody.
never
And I don't know
called
whether
the
she's
lady a
right or
liar.
wrong,
I
but
have
she wouldn't
never
lie to
called
anybody.
the
And we're
lady
going for a
a
commercial
fake.
break, and you can pick off. We'll be back in
It's also just filmed in a way like it's not like a found footage thing, but because it involves aspects of the real world, like they bring up Johnny Carson and things that most people will recognize, it kind of feels more real, like almost like those found footage things where there's an aspect to it of, even if you know it's not real, part of you is like, well, this feels like it's a real thing, and it's filmed in a way that seems very much like a 70s TV show.
Yeah,
like how
sure.
cheesy it is and all the jokes and everything. Like they do it in a way that makes it compelling and like a fun watch for sure.
Yeah, and there's that opening sort of montage with the voiceover from Michael Ironside that's introducing you to this stuff, and it tells you about Jack Delroy, and it even pretty quickly mentions that rumors abound about him visiting this mysterious secret society called the Grove out in California.
Jack's association with the Grove, a men-only club located in the Redwoods of California, has been the subject of rumors since his days in radio. Established in the 1800s and counting among its members politicians, entertainers, and captains of industry, the Grove has long portrayed itself as a harmless summer camp for the rich and powerful. But speculation swirls around its taste for arcane ceremony and its power to make and break careers.
And it's like, oh, well, that's
You're like, I know what that
pretty
is.
obvious that that's Bohemian Grove.
Yeah.
And it shows him getting his television contract from one of the big, I don't know, cable network bigwigs, and they say something about him making an ultimate sacrifice or something, like some foreshadowing. But when you get into the meat of the story, like the main guest on his show is this little girl who was bred in a satanic cult, the First Church of Abraxas, I think is what it's called, and it's clearly a stand-up of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan, and probably with a little bit of Michael Aquino's Temple of Set.
It seems to be a mix of them for sure.
Yeah, with a little bit of Waco.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
But yeah, and so she was bred in this First Church of Abraxas to be sacrificed to a demon, and they show interviews with the cult leader. I think his name is like something like Alexander Diablo or something like that, or no, it's Xandor Diablo, like Anton Xandor LaVey. Yeah. So he's clearly modeled after Anton LaVey, and now she ostensibly has a demon inside her, and she's been working with this psychologist who wrote a book about her working this stuff out. Dr. June something, I forget.
And just that plot in itself is very reminiscent of Michelle Remembers, which we'll bring up.
June Ross Mitchell, who I don't know if she's based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was a sort of a similar kind of person who got into paranormal stuff, and she wrote a book about the afterlife, and she didn't get too into satanic stuff, but kind of a similar vibe there. And she also works at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, which is kind of, for conspiracy nuts like us, that's a big topic, because you've got people involved in like the UFO community and all this stuff who were there, and they did a lot of experiments having to do with weird occult stuff like telekinesis and remote viewing, so it gets pretty weird. But the point is, in the movie, her name's Lily, and if you have the subtitles on, it's Lily with 3 L's, so it kind of like, is that short for Lilith? Probably. And she's possessed, or she says that there's a spirit inside of her she calls Mr. Wriggles, because he wriggles into her brain. They do a sort of like seance thing on air to summon Mr. Wriggles to come out, and he takes her over, and her voice changes. She has like 3 different octaves going on at the same time.
Yeah.
And she says something to Jack like, "Don't you remember me? We met under the tall trees."
Good to see you again, Jack.
Sorry, I don't believe we've been acquainted.
Don't be a fool. We go way back. We met amongst the tall trees. Remember?
So that's starting to give us an idea of like, oh man, so if you start putting this stuff together, and it's obvious that we're meant to take away from it that he went out to Bohemian Grove and did these satanic rituals so he could have fame. And another big plot point is that his wife died of cancer at the height of his fame.
And I think they even said it kind of came out of nowhere. She was like really healthy, and then she got it and then declined very quickly into a very serious form of cancer.
Mm-hmm. So it's a similar theme to Ready or Not. Like, the devil gives you this material wealth, but then he comes to claim his due at the end. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really effective premise for a horror movie. And just the way it references all these real life things. Bohemian Grove is one thing that we're weirdly close to.
Yeah. I used to live like 4 minutes or something from
like literally in proximity. We're close to it.
Yeah.
It's not far from us. You used to be way closer to it.
Yeah, I used to just be at the skate park and see people just like going there all the time. Yeah. Like, I know where you're going.
And we've known people in the area who worked there in the summer. I haven't heard too many like weird stories from them, just because they worked in like the dining hall, so that involves them getting on a shuttle and going to the dining hall, and they just they serve meals to the guests. And I mean, there are a lot of notable names, and there have been guest lists that have been leaked by people. Mm-hmm. And notably, one of them is Conan O'Brien, who I wonder if that had some influence on this movie, because it's like, clearly Conan O'Brien's one of the biggest late night stars, and he hangs out at Bohemian Grove every summer. And like, it's hard to say how into hardcore Satanism any of these people are. Yeah. Because Bohemian Grove obviously has the reputation. If anybody knows about it, they know about the cremation of care ritual that happens at the opening ceremony for the summer encampment. Yeah. And
every July they end up doing it.
Or I think it's the last week of June. And it's something I think a lot of the guests just see it as theater. Yeah. Symbolic theater, because the idea behind it is they're burning an effigy of care, like all of the cares of the world, the weight. They call it dull care, and they do this whole theatrical sort of ritual. They have like a little orchestra, and they act out this like psychodrama.
They have someone like narrate it really theatrically inside the owl. They have speakers all over, and
like the Owl of Wisdom comes down and says, burn your cares and stuff. And it strikes me as really similar to things that not just the elites do, but like I lived in Santa Fe for a while, and every summer they had the Zozobra festival, where they had a big effigy that they called Old Man Gloom, and they burned him down. And it's pretty much exactly the same thing, like burning away all the cares and all the like negative energy or whatever.
Yeah, whatever you associate the thing that gets burned with ends up kind of leaving a part of your psyche. I think that's how they look at the ritual.
Yeah, and another obvious parallel is Burning Man.
Yeah, for sure. Which I went to 6 or 7 years in a row. So it's like, and I went with people who, it's like, people don't look at that as an occult ritual. You know, people look at it as just like some kind of transformative thing. Like, I watched people who had no religious background, and like, that's where the man and the temple will have things written on them. Like, people will go and write sad things that they kind of want to get rid of. And it was always a really sad experience. Like, walking through the temple, which is always like a really pretty structure that's built pretty much with the intent of burning down. You'll go through and see people writing really heartfelt stuff to like their family who had died. It's like a friend or a family member who had unalived themselves, and it was like, I really wish I could have been there for you. I'm so sorry. So you'll see people like really grieving about a kind of thing, and it's such a big, experience where everyone's there pretty much doing degenerate stuff. People are doing drugs and just doing rave stuff. And then at the end of it, like you do that for like 5 or 6 days. And at the very end, everyone pretty much silently sits around and watches it all burn. So if someone had written something in it that was meaningful to them, you pretty much watch it burn away. And then it kind of goes back to partying. But it really can work in this way where it can release certain kinds of things in yourself. And I imagine that's probably what the people who don't think of occult stuff look at the cremation of care. You know, if you associate this thing with your care psychologically and you watch it burn away, they're like, oh, like, it's easy to get rid of the cares of the world. Look, it just burns away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and taking it back to Bohemian Grove, I think it's kind of similar to the dynamic we saw in all the different elite characters in Ready or Not, where some of them take the occult aspect of it way more seriously than others do. I get the impression that the majority of the guests at the Bohemian Grove encampment don't necessarily believe in like the satanic aspect of it. They do just kind of see it as theater and sort of a bacchanalian like release, for lack of a better term, like a decompressing.
Yeah, like a weird catharsis, like a release of some kind of thing. Catharsis.
But clearly, like, a lot of the movers and shakers are there. All these huge politicians, the Bushes, Kissinger.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think the plan for the Manhattan Project and to drop the atom bomb was, like, derived from just conversations at Bohemian Grove.
That's what they say, yeah. So, and I mean, it's been really popularized by people like Alex Jones and stuff like that.
I think someone my sister actually told me that. There's, like, videos online that came out in the last couple of years of a guy sneaking in 2 different times and kind of just like walking around the premise. He gets on like a little rowboat and uses a cast iron skillet. He like didn't bring a row, so he uses like a skillet to like get down the river to where he needs to be, and then just walks around, goes in some cabins, goes in the kitchen, sees a bunch of weird posters.
That was in the off season.
Totally.
So
when no one's there, I mean, they do stuff in the off season. It's just not the big encampment. Every once in a while, they'll have like groups come in, but it's all pretty minor.
The main events, like the last 3 weeks of June, I want to say. Yeah, because weirdly, June 13th of this year, the day that the Bad Orange Man was pew-pewed at, was the day of the cremation care ritual.
Oh, interesting.
And I think some people leaked footage of that, too. So I think I might even have that. I don't know if we'll get shut down for putting it up, but I'll try it anyway. So yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff going on there, clearly.
Yeah.
But I think something that comes to mind for me is like the idea of like the banality of evil. Because I think a lot of those people, like I said, they don't necessarily believe that they're being satanic, and they're not even necessarily consciously being malicious, but they're still participating in the spiritual darkness. And it makes me think about like when I was a kid getting into like metal and like dark stuff, and my dad brought me to an Iron Maiden concert. And they play the song "Number the Beast," and Bruce Dickinson's up there, screaming into the microphone 666, and a giant demon comes out of the stage and stuff. And we left the concert, and my dad was like, "That was so satanic." I was like, "Come on, Dad! It's just drama. It's just theater. Like, don't worry about it." And I think that's the attitude that most of them have, but I'm not convinced that that's all it is. Because even like Bruce Dickinson talks about, he's way into Aleister Crowley. He talks about how every concert is a shamanic ritual and stuff like that. So there's clearly a lot more going on behind that. And you can be skeptical about it, but I'm not convinced that these are just completely harmless, silly, fun things.
Yeah, I think a lot of them look at it as more of just like a self-serving kind of thing, in the same way that like a lot of the Church of Satan and Anton LaVey like portrays itself as like, oh, we just engage in the human things like lusts and passions and all the things that humans are driven to do. Like, you don't overcome those things. Like, we're about engaging in those things. Or if you dig into a lot of that stuff, there's like a way more like dark version that's explicitly like Luciferian, where it's like, no, it's not about that. It's about engaging in like dark practices for this kind of being. And and there's this huge range of people who will be involved in it who will be like, it's just innocent, it's engaging in the passions. And then you get people who are like, no, it's not that, it's more than that, and this is what it is.
Yeah, and you get people who are consciously like, we are actually communing with entities that give us power and give us money and give us what we want in return for our souls. Like, there are people who make deals with the devil. And that's the scary thing. Like, that's the really horrific elements about all this stuff, is like there's a reality to it that I think a lot of people are not really willing to even entertain anymore. You brought up Michelle Remembers, which I'm pretty sure
the girl is based off of.
Well, her book in Late Night with the Devil, they reference this psychologist's book, which is Confessions with the Devil, I think, and the cover and everything about it reminded me of this book called Michelle Remembers, which came out in the 80s at some point, I think. 1980. Okay. On Wikipedia, it says Michelle Remembers is a discredited 1980 book co-written by Canadian psychiatrist Lawrence Pastor and his psychiatric patient and eventual wife, Michelle Smith. A bestseller, Michelle Remembers relied on the discredited practice of recovered memory therapy to make sweeping, lurid claims about satanic ritual abuse involving Smith, which contributed to the rise of the Satanic Panic in the 1980s. So yeah, the premise of this book is that this psychiatrist, Lawrence Pastor, was doing hypnotherapy on this woman named Michelle. She allegedly had all these
recovered memories.
Recovered memories of being abused by a satanic cult.
That her family put her inside of the cult, pretty much.
Yeah. And Wikipedia says it's discredited because there are a lot of things that just don't seem to line up. We watched a documentary called Satan Wants You that I think came out last year. Yeah, 2023. It's on Tubi for free if you want to watch it. It's kind of interesting. But the whole idea of the Satanic Panic, people who are really skeptical about Satanism in general and the threat of Satanism always point to this. And they say, oh, that was debunked. That's a silly, stupid, evangelical Christian nonsense. If Satanists are real, the Satanists who are real are just atheists, and they're just LARPing, and they're just being edgy. Nobody actually believes in demons. Satan's not a real thing. Which clearly, I mean, we're an Orthodox podcast, and we believe in spiritual realities, and demons are real. So, and like a lot of atheists and people want to use this to debunk the basic worldview of Christianity. I didn't get to do as much research into this as I'd like to, so I'm just going off of sort of intuition and my gut reaction. It feels like this dialectical thing where this comes out and causes a bunch of panic, especially in like the evangelical circles, about secret high up families who are practicing Satanism and abusing children and all this stuff, to the point where there's a huge media blitz covering all this stuff, like people like Oprah and Geraldo Rivera talking about it, and you get like this sort of right-wing reaction condemning heavy metal, condemning Dungeons and Dragons and horror movies as vessels for Satan to corrupt the youth, which like it's pretty true, but it's all apparently based on a false premise, because I mean, if you watch this documentary, like we said, there's just a lot of things that don't really seem to add up, and there's something really weird about Lawrence Pastor's relationship with Michelle.
Yeah, the fact that they end up getting married is a pretty strange breach of something. Like, to be a psychiatrist doing all this stuff with someone and then end up in a intimate relationships, kind of.
Yeah, he left his family for her.
Yeah,
and there's a scene in the documentary where they interview a cop, because Lawrence Pastor and Michelle actually became consultants with a lot of different police departments in helping them deal with satanic ritual abuse, which kind of just already says that there is a reality to it. And this cop said that. He's like, I don't think it's all BS, but I also don't think it's all of the claims about it are true.
Which is a pretty reasonable take.
Yeah, it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, anyone who claims a thing, it's not the most coherent to be like every claim about it's true or every claim about it's false. You kind of have to judge them all.
Yeah, you have to sift through it. And he was like, but, I went to these consultation seminars with Lawrence Pastor and Michelle, and I was taking all these notes, and at a certain point, I noticed that this psychiatrist was answering all the questions that were directed to Michelle. And so I asked him, why isn't she answering? And he said, well, I recovered all the memories, and when she said them out loud and we recorded them, she let go of them. So now I'm the keeper of her memories, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And so he was like acting like a gatekeeper for her,
Yeah.
and answering for her and everything. And then the cop said like, "Oh, that's all I need to hear." And he said he put his pen down and stopped taking notes after
Yeah,
that.
totally.
So there's something weirdly manipulative about the psychiatrist.
And also the whole hypnotherapy thing.
Mm-hmm.
There really is some dubious stuff that
Yeah.
can come from hypnotherapy stuff. Like putting people in a hypnotic trance and then trying to get them to recall memories. It's not always true stuff that comes out.
Yeah.
Hypnosis is a weird kind of thing. And we don't fully understand it, but there's definitely kinds of things that people will say and recover that are provably not true. You'll get people to admit to stuff that couldn't have been the case.
Yeah.
And it's kind of frequent. And I was really into Darren Brown for a long time. I brought it up a bunch of times in the podcast in the past. And he has good instances of this. Like, he can get people to admit stuff that a minute before they were in crazy places, like they weren't there. They were there on camera. And so yeah, I'm pretty skeptical of that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, someone in a hypnotic trance says they remember this stuff from their childhood. It's already a red flag for me.
Yeah.
You're in a really susceptible state, very suggestible. And
And they even play audio from their sessions, from the therapy sessions, of Michelle being like, "I don't even know if any of this is true." She's like weeping. She's like, "I don't know what's happening to me. Like, I don't know what's true anymore." Like there's a clip of that in there, and it's like, huh. Yeah, and there's just a lot of details that I don't even know if we have time to go into about that. But it's really interesting because it kind of ties into this book I started reading that the Collins Bros actually recommended to me last year when we mentioned we might do something about the Salem Witch Trials. Philip Collins sent me a link to a book called Witchcraft at Salem by Chadwick Hansen. And I haven't finished it yet, but it's really good so far. He's definitely coming from like a really rationalistic, he's trying to be objective about it. And in the intro, he talks about how like most historians treat this in a way where it's like the Puritans were just deluded and they were hurting innocent people. They were like power-hungry Christian patriarchists who were abusing women and killing innocent people. And they were just wrong. Maybe even under the influence of like psychedelics from rotten wheat or whatever, like the ergot theory. Yeah. But he's like, no, witchcraft, everyone believed in it. Even the most rational, materialistic people knew that there were people who practiced witchcraft. And his idea is that like it's almost psychosomatic. Like the entire society was steeped in a belief in a spiritual reality, and there were people who believed that they were communing with dark forces and using the power that comes from that to hurt people maliciously. And it wasn't uncommon, but he doesn't necessarily think it's like real, but for them it was real, which is kind of a hard thing to parse out.
Yeah, our kind of rational people now who look at everything as like a kind of materialism, like the very rational people in the older generations, even very intellectual, well-known people, always had forms of like Isaac Newton was into like alchemy.
Yeah,
he wrote more on alchemy. Oh, really? Yeah, than anything else. A lot of those people were into astrology, and like the mix of what you consider totally rational is like not the standard of what we have today.
Yeah, he brings up Isaac Newton. He brings up Francis Bacon, who was like the father of modern science, essentially, who also had all these weird superstitions. And somebody else he brings up is Thomas Hobbes, who he says, like, I don't believe that these witches actually have the kind of power they say they have, but they believe it, and what they're doing is bad.
Yeah.
So we should not tolerate that, essentially, is what Thomas Hobbes said. So there's this weird idea that they were just persecuting innocent people. But there were people who were maliciously practicing witchcraft that seemed to actually be working on the townspeople. And so this author, Chadwick Hansen, goes through, he actually uses all these court documents from the primary source to try to parse out what was happening. And honestly, it's been pretty hard to follow. But what I can sort of glean from it is that there were innocent people that ended up being executed, but there were also people who were not innocent at all, and they were trying to hurt people. But there's this whole fog of chaos and confusion and mystery, and like who's telling the truth, who's lying, and that sort of is a very nuanced thing. And it's a very complicated thing, and it seems to parallel what was happening with the Satanic Panic, because there clearly are malicious people who believe that they worship Satan and who believe that they are apex predators who can force their will on other people without any moral constraint. That is a real thing that exists. And if you just logically take that to its conclusion, those people are going to hurt people.
Yeah.
They're going to do bad stuff. But then you get something like Michelle Remembers, and you get the sort of mob mentality, social unrest, kind of panic. Innocent people get caught in the middle of it and get hurt.
Yeah, like whether people are atheistic and don't believe there are certain realities that they can't see doesn't mean that there aren't people who do those things. Like I'm pretty sure I read a long time ago that like Aleister Crowley and like some of his like early cult members were thrown out of a village in northern Europe or in northern Italy for sacrificing goats in a building. And they got like kind of found while they were doing it.
Yeah.
And like I could imagine being one of those cops and not having like a overtly religious worldview, but still being like, no, you're not allowed to just kill goats in this house. Like whatever you're doing, I don't like it. It's not good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So I like the term. I can't remember where I first heard this term, but the idea of a thought terminating cliche, where it's just like you try to bring up satanic ritual abuse and somebody will be like, oh, like that Pizzagate nonsense, or just like, oh, like the witch trials or the Satanic Panic, that's all debunked.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It's like, not quite.
Yeah, there's a bunch of cliches like that have always kind of gotten to me. Like when people say like things are better explained by incompetence than malice.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes they are. Sometimes malice is a part of the world.
Yeah.
People are sometimes malicious, and sometimes there's malicious plans involved. So to like look at everything and be like, it's always incompetence. It's like it's like a thought terminating cliche.
Yeah.
Like people have like a phrase they can say and be like, I'm going to disregard whatever you're saying. Here's a phrase.
Yeah, which is really silly when you try to dissect that, because it's just assuming that there's no such thing as a maliciously acting person.
Totally.
Which is clearly not true. So there are a lot of loose ends that I'm not going to be able to tie up, and we might never be able to, but I just kind of wanted to throw all this on the table. It seemed like a cool or an interesting topic to talk about. We wanted to do something for Halloween, and I guess this is just the stuff we've been consuming and thinking about, so we thought we'd throw it out there. You know, this is an Orthodox podcast, and I don't know if I want to weigh in on the debate that comes around every year around Halloween, where it's like, should Orthodox Christians participate in Halloween at all? But when I'm thinking about personally, I have like a weird. We're talking about horror movies. Mm-hmm. I have kind of a soft spot for them because I grew up with them. But especially this year, like indulging in Spookytober stuff and horror movies and blood and guts and murder and scary witch devil things definitely has a sort of almost like a sedative effect on my consciousness. It's a weird thing. Like I could feel like almost like a dark weight on my spirit indulging in this stuff. So I think for the most part, when holy elders say like, maybe you should not do that, maybe you shouldn't go too far into that dark stuff, they're clearly right. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, and I'm not a priest, or I'm not going to try to give people spiritual direction, but just from my own experience of it, it's definitely not the most wholesome or healthy pastime. Yeah. And hopefully doing this podcast helps to sort of alleviate some of that and maybe transmute it into something useful. Since I went through it and did it, it's all in my head now. Maybe like this will help sort of untangle some of those weird knots. But I'm just kind of spitballing here at this point.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to tell how much people should engage in certain kind of worldly things. Because there's a certain aspect of like doing things with your kids that are fun and innocuous, and it's a tradition, and it's once a year, and and then there's something to dressing up like something. It kind of makes you like embody a character. Mm-hmm. So like you going out dressed up like a demon and then being kind of spooky all over and trying to scare people, like that might not be good for someone's psychology.
And there's another aspect too of like dealing with fearful things and having the courage to face them. Because one of the members in our parish, she brought her little kid out to a store and they had like a werewolf display, one of those werewolf decorations.
Yeah, like in Costco or something.
And he just panicked. He could not handle seeing such a scary thing. And it seems like it's something we need to learn how to deal with, being able to confront horrific images. So
especially if you think there are horrific things in the world,
Yeah, we can't just live in this bubble of naive innocence. So it feels like there's some kind of balance that needs to be struck. But yeah, I'm no expert, and I'm not going to solve any of these problems. But it's good to talk it out.
Yeah.
Another thing I've heard when some people talk about, or like when Orthodox people talk about Halloween, is like try to sort of baptize the traditions.
Yeah.
And
I like that concept.
Like, instead of dressing up as Freddy Krueger, go as like St. George and wear like a knight costume and a big cross on or something, and just try to do something wholesome and community oriented.
Yeah, I like that, because not all, because you'll get pagans and stuff who are like Christmas trees were not originally about Christ, and it's like, well, they are now. It's like, what about that? You know, it's like no one's being like Odin when they do Christmas stuff. You know, so it's like things could have come before and then get baptized and transformed into something Christian and wholesome. Yeah, and there's obviously a huge Mexican community in our area, and they've been celebrating Dia de los Muertos, which is something I never really got into or understood before, but I've been talking to people about it, and I like the basic idea of remembering your ancestors who have passed on. I don't know if it gets too spooky and weird with like certain teachings in the afterlife and stuff, but like just that baseline of honoring the people that came before you, I think, is a really wholesome thing. It's a very big thing in Chinese culture too.
Yeah. To
like go to your ancestors' grave like once or twice a year and be there with your family, and you eat food by them, and you kind of just hang out, and it's this inherent like tradition of remembering what you guys all come from. It bonds you guys. It gives you a sense of history that you all agree on. Mm-hmm. You know, especially in a world where things are very diverse and people are disagreeing about history and the meanings of certain things. Like coming together around some kind of thing and having an agreed story and history that you all take part of can be important for like binding people together. Absolutely. And it corresponds with the Western celebration of All Saints Day, remembering all the saints that went before you. So there's right after. Halloween is All Hallows Eve. It's the eve of All Saints Day. So at its core, it is a Christian holiday, and it has then all these trappings get put on top of it. You get all these weird ideas about like the veil between worlds being thinner and the spirits coming out. And I'd like to think we can, like we said, like baptize it and keep the Christian core of it, and redirect all that stuff to something that's more wholesome. Yeah, transmute it into something good. Yeah, hopefully we can do that, God willing. I don't know. I'm just talking. We're just Z-tier E-celebs. Yeah, true. So nothing we say really matters that much. But, if you listen this long, thanks for being with us. And I don't know. I guess we've come to the point where we're wrapping it up. Cool. Sorry we haven't uploaded that much. Hopefully we'll get more stuff out. We do what we can. Yeah. So just keep following us if you like us. I had a baby recently. I'm all of a sudden recently very busy. So yeah. We're all very busy, but we're figuring out how to balance work life and hobbies. So we're not going anywhere. We just might upload more or less, depending on what happens. Also, Jordan should have a banger coming out soon. I'm working on stuff. Yeah. So if you haven't checked Jordan's other YouTube channel, Metal Mystic, check it out. It's sick. Watch my 2 videos. One of them got copyright blocked, so I had to do a weird edit on it. I'm going to start putting stuff on other platforms too, because that's inevitably going to happen to all my videos. But yeah, check out Metal Mystic. Subscribe to us. We've got a Ko-Fi page if you feel like throwing some tips at us. If you like what we do and you want to support us, that would be an amazing way to do it. We even have some merch. Go buy some stuff. We'll have links in the description too. Put all the links out. But yeah, thanks for being with us. Happy Halloween. Happy spooky time. Synaxis podcast out. Yeah, God bless. Bye.